check that out. Dry brushing metallics today to a really solid high level. An army of these would look absolutely phenomenal. There is nothing complicated on there, and believe it or not, I've just used, wherever he is, I've just used one metallic color on that entire model. I know there's gold on it, but you'll see how I achieve that later on in the video. Really easy, super crisp results until about halfway through, and then with the inclusion of streaking grime from AK Interactive, we just ruin everything, make it look really tatty and old. So if you want to stop halfway through, please feel free, use the timestamps. They are below in the description. Hop around to whatever bit is the most relevant for you. And if you want to stop halfway through because that's the paint job that you'd be happy with for your army, rock on. Super easy, super fast, really enjoyable, and you can stop like 25 minutes in here. We had a pretty solid result. So you could stop there and do that across an entire army super quick, and then it's up to you whether you want to go back and weather it in the end or do some freehand or decals or, you know, any of that type of stuff. Right, we got some amazing results super fast. Let's see how. Let's jump in. Before we crack on with the model, I just wanted to show you this. I have made this as clear as I possibly can. So the bits that are still grey are the bits that are easy to leave optional. I hate moving parts, but this is going to help me gain access to other bits of the vehicle. So I haven't made these permanent, but I really do not enjoy painting wobbly bits. It's up to you whether you leave them movable or not. It's absolutely fine not to. And then finally, I thought I'd just show you what I've done on the base. So I've just wet blended between a sand texture paint, so that is agrellan Badland, and then this is Martian Iron Earth. You could be using agrellan Earth though, it's just I've used the two because they're different colors, so it makes it way more obvious, and I've sprinkled some slate on there. I'm going to hit that with a hefty layer of Monitorum varnish just to make all of that bottom layer resilient and permanent, and then all of this will be prime black, but that was the easiest way to show the bits that are easy to leave separate. I have temporarily glued them with just a tiny little spot of glue so I can rip them off later if I need to. Dampen my brush to start off with. I'm using an extra large. You can use whatever size you're comfortable with. I may well drop down a size or two at some point within this. Now this base coat, you're basically making what is a blue bolt gun equivalent here. The blue tint really adds a lovely kind of additional level to things. Don't worry if it's heavy. The idea with this is it's going to go absolutely everywhere. And because it's going over black, it should cover pretty much instantly. That actually took a little bit longer than I was expecting there. 8 minutes for base coating. That is probably slightly altered by the fact that I kept on knocking this little foot bit off. And I think really maybe using a large rather than extra large or stepping to it for the recessed sections would have been great. I hate moving parts, we'll get over it. So the next step is to take a little bit of the silver, add it to the mix, and we are no longer kind of base coating, looking for specific coverage, anything like that. We are going to traditional dry brushing. So the idea with this is that we're gonna hit the raised areas, the details, test it elsewhere on your pad. It's hitting the ridges, you're good. And then I'll go over the entire model doing this. Got a lovely foundation there. Now what I've done is I've just taken a bit of my blue and black, I've mixed them together, roughly probably 1 part paint to 4 parts water, so it's a very dilute mix. And what we're going to be doing here is washing the entire thing. Now the only thing you need to be careful with this, obviously we've not used a medium in here or anything like that. You could use a medium if you wanted. I'm not, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that nowhere on the model does it pull kind of super aggressively. So even though I'm using it quite thick, I'll return to the areas where I think there's too much on the model, and I will absorb it up and just kind of redistribute that everywhere else. Now this is a really helpful model. It's got panel lines, so I kind of work by panel. So I'll work up to the lines of each section, end it there, and then you get a nice kind of clean result. You don't have to worry about partially dried stuff or large expanses of kind of worrying areas where you might touch semi-dried paint with your brush or anything like that. So I just work on each panel, and anywhere where there's excess pooling, I'll just kind of daub that up and then drag it away to the edge of the next bit that I won't have touched yet. Don't worry if anything doesn't look absolutely perfect. We're going to be hitting this with another layer of dry brushing, so it's not a worry whatsoever. Just avoid any excessive pooling and you'll be absolutely fine. He's looking good, really been dulled down quite a lot. I'm going to leave that to dry for a fair while now because it's got some really deep recesses in it, and you do want it to be 100% dry before going to the next step. We've left that to dry overnight, actually, as it turns out, and that looks really, really good. This is a really solid combination of colors. I think one of the reasons it works so well is that it's so kind of internally coherent and cohesive, because all the colors from the first stages, or the two colors that we tinted the silver with, have been used in the wash. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put another wash on this just to further push the shades, and then we're going to jump onto the highlights. In this I have 2 parts black to 1 part blue. I'm going to put a big blob of Lamy medium in there, or 2 half blobs. As you can see, that blue is pretty potent, so even though we've got more black, and I know black is incredibly strong, it's still pushing through there. I'm going to water the rest of this down. Okay, so now this wash, a couple of things about it. Number one, it's not going to be landing on shiny metal, so it won't be pushed to the recesses as much. And number two, it is darker. So what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm still going to let gravity do its work, but I am going to be coaxing it more towards the darker, the areas of the model that I want it to be darker in, so the recesses. We're going to be hitting everywhere with a dry brush anyway. When you put it on, it will look pretty severe, but just keep on coaxing it into those areas, as you can see I'm doing on this armored section here, and you'll be fine. If you get it on areas that are really sticking out, don't worry about that too much, because they're areas that are going to be hit very, very readily and easily with any dry brushing steps. Any dry brushing is going to, like the trim around these, for example, any dry brushing is really going to aggressively pick up on that. If any area seems to be too heavy, if you're working fast, you can always go back with a brush with just water on it and then coax things down into the recesses. And a really useful tip when washing: carefully blowing it will actually kind of concentrate it in the areas that you want it to. It's a really good tip. You actually get this effect if you apply washes with an airbrush to some degree, because obviously the airbrush is blowing it out of the way. But I'm going to be doing this all over again, and that's going to be kind of our mega depth added to all of these sections. So this is looking pretty awesome. You could just do some colors and leave it there, honestly. It's looking really, really nice. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to use a little bit of our previous mix. It's on the palette, I may as well use it for coherency. A little bit of silver, work them in very thoroughly, remove a lot of it. Test it, we've got the base that we can test on. And then starting somewhere hyper textured, because that's kind of less at risk, I'm going to work my way all over the model. Now, it may look like we're repeating steps, and that's because we are. What we're doing here is we're just allowing this is a good way to put the look of time and history into sections of your model, because you're doing the same thing non-opaque, so slightly transparent. It's not a full coverage flat base coat or anything like that. You're repeating it again and again, and as you get kind of more dark colors in the recesses, more washes, more bright colors on the raised areas, and you put washes over the raised areas and stuff like that, everything kind of homogenizes and falls into the same spectrum, and it should look like a kind of beautifully worn, old, battered piece of kit by the end of it. So we're doing this all over. At this stage, you could stop doing it on under sections if you wanted to keep them dark. Entirely up to you, but I'm going for kind of a holistic approach all over the miniature with this technique. So the next step is to simply go to a more pure version of the silver. I've still got some of the previous layer in my brush. You'll have noticed that I'm using the dampening pad a lot for this. The reason is I do not want to put any heavy coats on my model. I'm removing a lot, and I'm only taking it to the model when I'm confident there's going to be zero streaking. So it has to be at kind of buffing stage. You can see that on the rocks there. They're kind of a useful place for me to test. So with these stages, I'm only going to model at the point at which I'm super confident we're not going to get streaking and there's not too much paint on the brush, it's not too dry, it's not too wet, that type of stuff. So the dampening pad is going to help us keep it smooth. Metallics are actually great for doing multiple layers without adding too much texture. I don't think people realize that it's one of the amazing pluses of using high quality metallics. So you can put on loads and loads of stages super fast with texture-based techniques with pretty much no downside. This is beginning to look really, really good now, especially those shoulder plates, stuff like that. Hopefully you can see kind of how realistic this looks. It's got a lot of depth to all the sections, and even though we've only got pretty much one color on it, it's looking fantastic. Looking lovely. So at this stage, I'm gonna do what I would describe as an edge highlighting dry brush. I'm pretty happy with how shiny this is looking. This layer is going to be a combination of two. It's a kind of a finishing stage, and you could leave your model here and just kind of blank out some panels, but we're going to be doing some fancy stuff. The idea with this is that I'm going to be doing one of two things. I'm going to either be very, very carefully stippling to suggest kind of light points being on the top of it. So you see, I didn't even take any paint from my brush then, I've just used the dampening pad. And I've got to be very, very confident that I'm not going to make any mistakes to be willing to go in and do something that could potentially ruin my paint job at this stage. So I'm only going to do this when I'm absolutely certain that there's nothing naughty on the brush. So that's the stippling, and then the other part of it is the actual edge highlighting. So I'll take some paint, roll it around you. I know it's a circle, but you want it on every side, every part of this brush, every angle of this brush. And then what we're going to be doing there is we're going to be removing less than we have been, and we're going to be rolling it to hit specific edges. So even 45-degree angles like this one here, we can hit as long as we roll it carefully. And to really exaggerate that, that is the rolling motion. So it's kind of like a controlled flick. I'm not holding it at the back here to be floppy, I'm holding it here, and I'm really, really specifically going to use that to highlight only certain angles. And this is going to work wonders. So I'll do that until the paint's gone off the brush, dampening pad, work off some more, and then that should give me a kind of a super safe brush for stippling or buffing up highlights on the very top part of the model. I'm not involving any dark colors. This is the pure bright silver, and I'm going to take that approach all over the model, and hopefully that should get it to a really, really good level of detailing. Look at that, that's looking really good. I love true metallics. I also really like dry brushing, you might have noticed. Right, on my palette I have a kind of an interesting point to note here. Now, on my palette, all of these sections that look exactly the same are made from 3 different colors. They're made from contrast, Yandan yellow, shade, Cassandora yellow. So this is the contrast, this is the shade, and then believe it or not, this is the juice from the top of Retributor armor if you don't shake it. So they all net end up making the same color, and that kind of similarity is something you can use to your advantage if you want to just paint your silver bits with one glaze to turn them into gold, which is what we're going to be doing. I've mixed a tiny amount of Voluptuous Pink, which is a turbo contrast, super strong, in with Cassandora Yellow, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be spotting the corners, these darker sections here, of my trim with this before I go and hit all of it as a whole with just pure Cassandora Yellow. So this should add some depth to it. So I'm going to dot the rivets, I'm going to dot the corners, and this should give us a kind of true metallic metal feel to all of these trim sections. It may look a little bit delicate, but it's super fast in terms of the time you put in, and you don't have to be delicate with it. So one tip is to push your paints in the direction that you want, or pull them in the direction that you want. End your strokes at the sections that you'd like the darkest. So if you're dotting a rivet, it doesn't matter, but if you're pulling into a corner, actually do pull into it, like literally pull it with your paint. Hopefully that pre-shading has worked. I'm going to take a little bit of the Retributor Armor Juice. I'm going to test this on the model just kind of as is, see how it looks. And then we might add some Cassandora to it. You can probably see there's bits dotted around this model where I've tested various things, including some reds and stuff like that, but this is where we're going. All right, Retributor Armor Juice is go, and that pre-shading is looking exactly how we planned on it being. So this is what we're going to use to turn all of our silver gold. I'm going to do at this stage is I'm going to be doing some pre-highlighting before I do a second step, and I'm going to be doing a dry brush of silver between my dark sections, so hitting the edges and then hitting kind of raises or alternating points between the darker points that we put on the corners and stuff like that. So for instance, dark section, I'll put a light section, dark section, I'll put a light section. The next step, you could use any streaking grime. I've got a specific one here which is for dark yellow vehicles. It's not quite the shade I want, so I'm going to mix it with a rust. This is an old brush, by the way. I am not going to be using one of my favorite brushes with this whatsoever. This is light rust for dark green vehicles. If anyone's interested, that ratio is probably about 4:1 of this to the darker streaking grime. Okay, so this has been hit with a purity seal, monitorum varnish, rather, and I'm going to coat the entire thing again all over with this. You could use an airbrush for this if you wanted, or you can just brush it on. The important thing is to leave it to dry for a good while afterwards. You want it to really kind of sit in there and become one with the model before you tear it all off. So as you can see, I did 2 stages with the brush and 1 stage with the airbrush. Airbrush is just slightly faster, quite a lot faster actually, probably like 4 or 5 times as fast. You can do it all in one go. If you're going with the brush, as you're doing your following stages, you just have to overload the brush and dab it on and let kind of surface tension do its job. You don't want to brush it too physically on there because you'll remove the previous layer, so just keep dabbing gently and you can build up the layers quite easily. As you'll have seen by my second stage, I just added 1 layer of airbrushing over the top to kind of get this to what I needed, which doesn't look particularly great. Looks like I've deleted a load of my hard work. Let's see how it goes. So I've got here a low profile kind of microfiber cloth. It's the type that you get for wiping glasses or a webcam in this case. And I'm going to start off with that for my removal, and then I'm just going to work from there. I chose to remove quite a bit of the streaking grime from my model using my low profile cloth, even going as far as pretty much buffing the top sections of it because I wanted them to remain shiny. So it's entirely up to you how much you want to remove, just down to personal preference, personal taste, and it depends what the impression is of the army that you want to give to anyone looking at it. Do you want it really old? Do you want it kind of just in the recesses? Do you want it heavy all over? Is it dry? Has it run in there because of moisture? You know, whatever approach you want to go for, that's absolutely fine, and you can achieve anything with streaking grime. It's super flexible, and you can always add more if you take too much off. So obviously we've gone over clock, we're over the 100-minute mark. I'm just scooting around with some engine oil after the previous step, which has turned out pretty amazingly, really. That was just insanely efficient for the result that we've got there, how genuine it looks. I really love that. So I'm just going to scoot around now with the engine oil and kind of focusing on areas around joints. I'm going to put some little smears of that on. I don't know what I'm going to do for the rest of it. I'm going to have to figure it out. I don't know how much further I'm going to go with it. It's very easy to go too far with weathering because I find it far too much fun, basically. So we're going to scoot around doing this. So as you can see, I've just kind of mushed together Wordbearer's Red and Deathcore Brown on the base, and then I'm going to go through a kind of fairly predictable sequence, highlighting them, just adding a larger proportion of Deathclaw, and really doing my best to make this feel like a very dry, arid, kind of alien-like landscape. You could absolutely use pigments for this if you wanted. That would probably look really good, but I'm just going to dry brush it up through these with that deep red base, and then go to a very sandy brown. Finishing touches are entirely up to you. You could do some scratches. If you do, it's just a matter of really diluting things down, making sure you don't have too much on the brush. And then you can see I've done a couple here on his thigh. There we go, effects like that are very easy to do, gotta be steady. And then the other thing that I've done is I'm just gonna bring some attention to his brow because I like people to look at the face of my models, regardless of whether they're a robot. And at this stage, I'm not worried that this doesn't particularly make sense because everything else on him is super beaten up and it doesn't make sense that he'd have a brighter face, because I just want people to be looking at that area of the model, focusing on it. So quickly gonna go around, scoot that, and then that super bright metallic sheen along with those green eyes is really going to pull people's eyes right to that part of the model. So a final and really important stage of the detailing is going to be just sooting up a few key areas on the model. So I've got a small here. Now you can use the extra small, and I will be using it for some specific bits. I used it for kind of dragging upwards out of this port here, but the really important thing for me is that I get soft blends, and the larger the brush, the easier it is to get soft blends. It holds more, it'll hold more before it fully dries out, and completely dried out paint is what gives you kind of chalky jobs. So I'll use the biggest job I can, which in this case is only the small, but that's still absolutely fine. And I'm going to build this up everywhere. For the smaller stuff, if I'm going to jump to the extra small, you really do have to take a lot of care. There's a reason this brush is tiny, and it's because it's for things like this. There we go, so I'll be jumping between the small and the extra small, going all over the model, and this will add a huge point of contrast, especially in these top shiny sections. I am super pleased with this. That would look phenomenal over an army. You could of course add some red sections or anything like that. You could weather it more, you could weather it less. As I stressed, it's an entire set of techniques for you to use however you see fit. So you could end up with super shiny, clean grey knights, just skip out all the weathering sections and jump straight to the final highlights. You could cover them in splatters of blood. I think some really dark, glossy black oil dripping out of different spots would look phenomenal. And of course, you could go down a more grimdark route with this. He's actually not that far off that type of style. He's a little bit clean because it does tend to be very rough and ready and war-torn. But with just kind of desaturating it a little, maybe knocking that gold back, turning it to more bronzy or something like that, you could really just go in any direction you want. Red would look amazing on this, and also you could absolutely take a filter and put it over the silver sections, just like we did with the yellow to turn it to gold. You could be putting like cherry candy red over there or whatever to get an amazing gloss effect. If you're doing that, putting some scratches down beforehand looks absolutely brilliant. So that's an amazing way to achieve whatever result it is you're going for. So we are done. Please like, please comment, please subscribe, hit that bell notification to be notified for future content. And if you have any questions or suggestions or ways that you like to achieve metallics or something you would like to see us approach next on the channel, we've had kind of like a metal week here. All been good. I love playing with metallics and they dry brush absolutely amazingly. So really pleased with the end results. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next tutorial.